When I was planning on what I was going to preach about and I landed on my influencer, I thought I wanted a song that talked about change and how it's a long time coming, but that change will come. So like I said earlier, my name is Pastor Jenny Bates, and I don't use pronouns, so when you refer to me, you'll call me by your name. So when you send an email to Jonathan later saying it was amazing or it was an awful sermon, you're going to put Jenny said this and Jenny did this. But I'm hoping that no matter how you feel at the end of the sermon, you know that God's peace is available to you and with you. When I heard we were doing a series on influencers and that I was going to get to preach, I thought about all of the people in my life who have influenced me, from my childhood to my adulthood. And one of the largest groups that has had the most impact on my life are trans and queer elders, activists who have fought for inclusion and liberation in our world. It may seem strange to some of you that I'm talking about queer and trans people as an influencer of my faith, but some of you are not surprised at all. And some of the people I think of when I talk about these influencers are people like Harvey Milk, Reverend Dr. Pamela Lightsey, Reverend Polly Murray, Miss Major, and a Denton activist named Dr. Carmen Cruz. All these people have worked to create a space for peace where God's love is for everyone. In this world of peace, they're creating gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, and ability are not deviations from God's creation. They are God's creation. These queer and trans elders look at the world around them and say, no more pain, no more suffering. We will bring justice and people will be liberated and free. I think of these elders as a huge influence in my life and in my work to make sure our youth at this church feel safe, feel peace, and how my college students at my university feel cared for and loved. When I was thinking about this, there are thousands of people I could talk about, but I picked two people specifically, Sylvia Rivera and Marcia P. Johnson. I brought some of my art with me today. One is just a picture because the painting is 4 feet by 4 feet, and I could not fit it in my car. And I have a truck, so that was pretty impressive. This is Marcia and Silva by an artist named Jacoby Roberts. The painting actually has a ton of glitter on it. So this is a reflection of a moment at a Christopher Street protest. I also have two bricks up here with me. Each of these bricks, this one says Sylvia, and the other one says Marcia. It's got the trans pride flag painted on top. Were painted by a community activist named Inadelia Sauceda. These bricks are reminders to us of their actions at Stonewall, where they are credited with throwing the first bricks, and also that these women are the foundation of the modern LGBTQ rights movements. When thinking about these women, they influenced me in not only how I interact in the world, but how I am in the world and who I am. Today we call them trans or genderqueer women based on their descriptions of how they presented themselves. That just means they didn't align who they are with the gender they were given by their doctors at birth. These women may have used older words like transsexual or transvestite to describe themselves, and I will say those words throughout today. But I wanted to remind our community that those are old words now. I'm not giving you permission to call anyone a transsexual or a transvestite in this room. That is considered a slur. And so when you're talking about a trans person, first, the best thing to do is to ask them, who are you? Tell me about yourself. And if they tell you about them, listen to how they describe themselves. I just wanted to get that out of the way because when I say it later, I know that may shock some people in our space. So getting back to Marcia and Sylvia, one of the things that they taught me is the importance of finding peace in yourself and understanding your faith with God as your own. They taught me to let no one else tell you who you are or to tell you what your relationship with God should look like. In a world where queer and trans Christians are told they are not Christians because of who they are, this is a radical idea that God loves you and you can love God. Sylvia and Marcia created and lived out a faith built on the actions of love, peace to everyone, but especially those who are abused by harms of people in positions of power. Marcia and Sylvia believed that everyone deserved God's love. Everyone deserves safety, care, regardless of their background or who they love, and that faith informed their actions and their activism. Marcia and Sylvia found peace and hope they were denied due to racism and transphobia in God and in their spirituality. When I think of them, I think of the verse from John 14, verse 27, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid." The women did not let fear stop them from doing the work they needed to do to live into their calling. They did not let other people's expectations or limitations keep them from doing the work of justice. As the video said, Marsha P. Johnson's often called Saint Marcia. She's also known as the mother of the movement because of the way she was so selfless in her care. In a biography by a person named Tourmaline Marcia, it says, Marcia was so uniquely and unconditionally loving. She dedicated her life to her community and was called Saint Marcia by chosen family and friends because of the profound generosity of her spirit and her religious commitment to finding God in everyone around her. Who else have we heard of in churches that shows unconditional love? I'll give you a hint. It's Jesus and God, if you don't know who I'm talking about. You never know who walks into a sanctuary on a Sunday morning, and we are so glad you are here, whether you knew that answer or not. While Marcia was the mother of the movement, Sylvia was the fire of the movement. Between her and Marcia, they made sure the people under their care were fed and were safe. She was the bridge that helped the trans rights movement of the 60s connect with other groups like the Young Lords, a Puerto Rican youth organization, and the Black Panther Party. These women were peace bringers, makers, and keepers in a world where the church was failing. The women were Christ outside of the church's walls to people who needed Christ. When Marcia cared and prayed for men dying of AIDS in the 1980s and 90s, she was one of the few people who prayed. She would pray. She would sit beside the bedside of men dying and say, "You are going home across the River Jordan, and I will meet you there." Sylvia continuously fought for the release of trans people in jail for corrupt reasons, echoing our Methodist founder, John Wesley, who sat in prison and fought for the rights of prisoners. For these women, I see them as in the story of the Good Samaritan. They were both the person who was lying in the ditch in the story of the Good Samaritan, who had been beaten and abused and left to die, and they were also the Samaritan who got them out of the ditch. They knew what it was like to be forgotten and left to die, and they knew they would not let it happen to others. Marcia's journey to a Christ-like love in her work wasn't surprising to the people who knew her. It was surprising to me when I first read about it. I had never heard of her faith journey before. But she was raised in the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. And throughout her life, she mentions numerous times about her relationship with God. She said, "I went to church every Sunday, honey, because I wanted to learn about Jesus." She said that even though church can have a repressive influence on many young queer people, something else happened for Marcia. She took in the beauty of devotion and prayer. Even at a young age, Marcia was able to see the beauty glinting through the cracks of otherwise oppressive structures designed to keep her out. Even though the world told Marcia she was not worthy of love, she saw the beauty glinting through the cracks of the church's walls. She saw God in spaces where she was told God did not see her. Marcia's faith continued to follow her after, like the video said, she moved to New York after high school. She lived on Times Square, not in Times Square, but on the streets of Times Square. And when she was talking about this experience, she said, "I took the Lord in my heart and took him with me. I moved to the city for better or for worse, and he, the Lord, said, you might wind up with nothing." Because me and Jesus were always talking, and I said, "Honey, I don't care if I have never have nothing until the day I die. All I want is my freedom." In Marcia's life, her conversations with Jesus and God helped her find peace in who she was, helped her find peace that even though her circumstances, if we looked at them, would seem unpeaceful all of the time, she found peace. She knew what it meant to have peace in a world that denied it to her, and she found it in herself. Marcia knew her value, and she knew that God was always with her, including in the streets where she and other trans people sold sex to survive. God was with her. Marcia's faith taught her to find peace in who she was and gave her resilience that's desperately needed when you're an oppressed person or you're doing the work of activism. She knew that she deserved God's love and care. I think that's a lesson a lot of us are still learning. So often we're trying to find out, does God love us? Look at what's happening in our world. Look how I'm treated as a trans person. Look how my queer daughter is being treated. Look at my disabled sibling. Society tells us we are not worthy of love and God is not with us. And yet we have to know in our soul God is. Sylvia was also a spiritual person. She was raised Catholic. And while she doesn't have record and doesn't talk a lot about being an attending Catholic, going to church, there's lots of talk about her being spiritual. And she brought saints into her work and the care of her people. When talking about the home that Marcia and Sylvia created, they said Sylvia fervently prayed for protection and prosperity of the trans women and children in their home. Sylvia, like Marcia, cared for the people around her. When they were going hungry, she would work with Marcia and they would find ways to distract people so the youth could grab just enough food that they could eat that day. They knew that they were going to have to do some things to take care of each other because everyone in their care and themselves was loved by God. Marcia and Sylvia finding peace in God and finding peace in who God created them to be opened doors for me to find peace in myself of who God created me to be. Seeing Marcia being at peace with who she was allowed Sylvia Rivera to find a way to find peace with herself and her own identity. When Sylvia first met Marcia, she was 11 years old. Marcia was 18, and she said, Marcia in full drag, just walking down the street, putting on a special occasion outfit and appearance where the mundane usually goes, this had a found perfect on Sylvia's understanding of what is permissible, what is possible. Church, when you show up as your authentic self in every space in this world, God will use you to help other people find their authentic selves. Just like Marcia and Sylvia did. Sylvia had spent her life desperately seeking peace and safety. She was raised in the Lower East Side by her grandmother. Her mother was a Venezuelan immigrant. Her father was from Puerto Rico. Unlike Marcia, who actually had some support by her family, Sylvia's family never supported her, to the point she attempted suicide at age 11. Realizing that she was worthy of love and peace after that attempt, Sylvia ran away to New York. And in her journey, she landed with the queens of Times Square, where Marcia was, and she ran away because she knew, I can't find peace here, and I love myself enough to go find peace. Our trans youth today are often in the same situation Sylvia found herself in the 1960s and 70s. They're fighting the same denials of their rights and their ability to have peace and exist in our society that Sylvia felt. Marcia and Sylvia show us that we can have peace and we can create peace for our youth. We just have to nurture it, like how Sylvia was nurtured on the streets of Times Square. Marcia and Sylvia lived life of a seemingly peaceless moments. They were constantly threatened and abused by police, the doctors, and everyone else who had power over them. They and other trans people faced criminalization for just existing in the world. After years of being denied this peace, people like Sylvia and Marcia, the people of New York, had finally had enough. In 1969, the Stonewall riots began. The Stonewall riots happened at a bar that was often a place where police would come in and beat up queer and trans people, arrest them, and force them out based on laws that targeted appearance and sexuality. People were used to being harmed. They had settled for being abused. But on that night in 1969, whatever their fears were that had been overpowering them, forcing them to create a not true peace, but at least it wasn't violence, were forgotten. And that evening they fought back. Black and brown, trans, and gender nonconforming people had finally realized that fear was not going to give them peace. Not their fear of the police, not their fear of being arrested, even the fear of death. None of those things brought peace. They actually took it from them. They took a stance and a reflection of what Jesus offers us in John. They did not let their hearts be afraid or troubled. They acted in defiance in their quest for love and liberation. Now, you might say, Jenny, the video said there was violence at Stonewall. You are correct. Stonewall was not a peaceful moment. It was filled with violence, both by queer and trans folks and the police. But the queer and trans people in that bar that evening were done with being afraid, and they let the people know in power that this was ending with them. Stonewall was an inflection point of powerlessness turning into power. They knew who they were and how they wanted to be treated. Just like Jesus, who flipped tables at the temple, or Judith, who cut off the head of Holofernes, queer and trans people at Stonewall took action to defend their communities. Their acts said, we will no longer tolerate evil and oppression in any form they present themselves, because they knew who God created them to be. Marcia and Sylvia also knew, though, that violence at Stonewall would not create a lasting peace. Marcia and Sylvia showed me what it means to do the work of creating space for a community, how to do the work of loving your neighbor. Like I said, they, after Stonewall, realized something had to change. So the two women formed STAR, the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. STAR demanded that transvestite and gay street people should be granted full and equal rights on all levels of society and a full voice in the struggle for liberation of all people. The work of STAR, of everyone at STAR, including Marcia and Sylvia, shows me that we cannot create peace just through statements. We have to do the work of peace found through justice. Marcia and Sylvia did the work of love and actions. Through STAR, they housed 25 people off the streets, including some cats and dogs. They prayed for one another as they lived through AIDS and lived through heroin addictions. They cared for one another and showed each other what true love and peace looked like. Like many people who are revolutionaries, like Jesus and others, Marcia and Sylvia's lives were cut short. Marcia was found in the Hudson River in 1992. She had gone across the River Jordan like she had been saying her whole life what death would be. Sylvia lived a little longer than Marcia and passed away in 2002 from liver cancer. Even then, she worked hard to make sure that people had their rights. She was working on her deathbed to secure health care for trans people, working until the end to show people God's great love. In these women, I see moments of the Beatitudes, of Jesus speaking in Matthew 5, flashes of a Christ-like love. And we get to see through Marcia what a future could be for our world. Tourmaline writes, "It's a gift to see the world through Marcia's eyes, in order to change the harshest conditions, to survive in a world not designed for your survival, to believe in your dignity and constant disempowerment, violence, and loss. You have to be able to see beyond what is right in front of you. Instead, you need to see into what is possible and what might be, what could be, and what will be. Bringing heaven on earth as Christ asks of us to do." So, church, I don't know what you've learned today through Marcia and Sylvia. I've told you what I've learned. I've told you how they cared for the people around them and how they taught me to be an activist that saw people for who they truly are and their needs. So I ask you to take their legacy and live into it. I ask you to protect trans and queer people. If you don't know how to do that, the most simple thing you could do is call your representatives and your senators. Tomorrow morning, the Senate of Texas will hear a bill that prohibits bathroom usage for trans people. It also prohibits trans people from using dormitories at state agencies. It prevents people from using locker rooms. What trans people need from the church right now is for the church to raise its voice and say, this is not God's will and God's love. So call your representatives, call your state senators, let them know this bill is not what we need in this world. We also need to protect people by allowing themselves to be their full selves in this space. We need to use correct names and pronouns for people in our church spaces. I know you all are trying, and I need you to try harder because it matters to that person's soul that they are seen. We also can love our neighbors like Sylvia and Marcia did, working across groups and issues like protecting our community from ICE raids and arrests. We matter to God. Our neighbor matters to God. Sylvia and Marcia show us that. I'm going to leave you all with a reading of John 14 and a reminder of this peace that God leaves us that Sylvia and Marcia showed me. Christ says that peace is brought by the Holy Advocate, and also the advocate will remind his disciples of the lessons he taught. These lessons included how to love your neighbor, to care for the hungry and the sick, to speak to injustice and how women and children are treated, and to love yourself and God. Church, it is not just enough, Jesus says, to have peace. We must take that peace and do something with it. We need to do the actions of love and resilience. We need to be the Marcias and Sylvias in our world that we're so desperately looking for. So I wanted to wrap up with a prayer as we move into a time of communion. Join me in prayer. Dear God, thank you for the voices of liberation who show us a different way. thank you for the life of Marcia P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. May we be them now. May we bring peace and safety to all those we meet so they can experience your everlasting love. Amen.